Welcome back to the studio. You're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Shona Bhattacharya. Let's take a look at our top stories in this edition. Hitting back at international criticism over Gabon's presidential vote, Ali Bongo tells opposition leader and losing candidate Jean Ping to take his demand for a recount to the country's constitutional court. And later in the program, we'll be taking a closer look at the growing outrage in South Africa over black students' hair after the director of a prestigious girls' school in Pretoria was fired over the school's decades-old conduct policy. Our guest on the topic will tell us why the uproar is taking place now. Pointing his rival in the direction of Gabon's constitutional court, Ali Bongo, who was declared the winner of the August 27th presidential election, suggested Jean Ping take up the matter in court, a proposal rejected by the opposition leader. Bongo was responding to demands for a recount of the vote, which provoked post-election violence that killed at least 6 people. Alexander Alcott has more.
EU observers in Gabon say there's no doubt that the vote that led to Ali Bongo's re-election was deeply flawed. Central to their conviction are the results recorded in Outrage, one of 9 provinces in the country and a stronghold of the Bongo family.
In the province of Outrage, there were more non-voters than the Electoral Commission declared at the end of the vote.
The region reported a turnout of 99.93% compared to a national average of 48%. That would mean that only 51 people out of more than 71,000 on the region's electoral register didn't make it to the ballot box. Bongo is under increasing pressure at home and abroad, including from former colonial power France, to order a recount. He's refused casting aspersions on the integrity of EU observers and questioning the legitimacy of his rival's successes.
It's the Constitutional Court that does the counting and who are responsible for deciding whether to do a recount. And as far as the results concerned, I'm amazed people aren't talking about the provinces where Jean Ping apparently got 100% of the votes.
The opposition leader Jean Ping, for his part, insists he has no faith in the Constitutional Court. The African Union has said that a delegation is headed for Gabon to mediate the crisis. It will likely be led by one of Africa's longest-serving heads of state, Idriss Déby, who's been in power in Chad since 1990.
Arresting a suspected militant in the Niger Delta, Nigerian authorities say soldiers and security officers detained Isaac Romeo with 2 other men a few days ago. Romeo is a suspected leader of the Niger Delta Avengers militant group that's been accused of attacking oil and gas infrastructure in the area. The group declared a ceasefire late August, but the Nigerian military continues to arrest suspected militants. A train accident in Ivory Coast has caused no deaths or injuries, but the derailment will have grave consequences for cargo traffic between Abidjan and Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. The accident took place Tuesday when a gangway gave way. The bridge's metal structure is still intact, but clearing the twisted steel will take effort to clear. The Abidjan-Ouagadougou railway line is one of West Africa's major economic routes. Allowing protests to go ahead in Zimbabwe, the country's high court has overturned a 2-week ban on demonstrations in Harare, the capital, a decision made by police after a series of violent clashes with anti-government protesters. A group of 18 political parties challenged the ban. In recent months, growing anger has led to near-daily demonstrations in Harare, calling for 92-year-old Robert Mugabe, who has been in power since 1980, to step down. Maintaining grooming standards or targeting students for their race. Schools in South Africa have long had strict rules for students on their behavior, their uniforms, and their hair. Last month, black students at the prestigious Pretoria High School for Girls protested a clause that banned wide cornrows, braids, and dreadlocks. The school, which was an all-white institution until the mid-1990s, dropped the restrictions, but the conversation about so-called acceptable black hairstyles continues.
these students are challenging their teachers. Cape Town schoolgirls continuing a protest that started in Pretoria. They want their school to change its code of conduct. Black students are questioning why they are not allowed to wear their hair naturally, and they have the backing of their mothers in their struggle. For most of the protesters, the debate goes beyond hairstyles.
My child's got big hair, and now she must put water in her hair so that she can attend the school. They don't allow any afros in the school. And secondly, they can't speak Xhosa. They said they can't talk Xhosa during lunch or in the corridors or somewhere. They know they can speak English in the class, but outside the class, at least they can talk their mother language.
These girls have the support of former students who say they've had the same experiences. They say the rules in this previously whites-only school are racist.
They also use the word exotic hair when explaining what untidy and unacceptable hairstyles is. Those words like exotic are problematic. It's saying that African bodies and their hair on African soil is exotic. That's not the definition of exotic. When they say they expect neat and tidy hair, what is your meaning of neat?
Sansusi students eventually managed to meet with the Provincial Minister of Education. Their memorandum is being treated as urgent and is being dealt with at the highest level.
I'm very concerned, and you can't tell them they can't use their own hair and speak their own language. You know, I've heard it said that some of the reasoning that they must speak English there is because they need to improve their English at school. I can understand as an English school, and maybe in the classroom you need to speak English because everyone else needs to understand you. But if you're speaking to a friend of yours who speaks an African language, then obviously you shouldn't have to speak English to them at break or on the way home. So the rule has been taken to extremes that are, in my view, unconstitutional, and I think it's really important that we sort this out as soon as possible.
The principal of the school has been suspended for now. The Minister of Education has promised disciplinary action should the investigation find the allegations of racism to be true.
For more on the topic of black hair, our guest is Hlonipha Mokoena, Associate Professor at the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. Professor, these rules about hair have been around for decades, and they concerned not just black students, but all students regardless of race. Why are we seeing this backlash now?
Thank you for inviting me to comment on this. I must basically add a disclaimer that I'm not an expert on the policies, but what I will tell you is that under apartheid, we had what was called Christian national education. And under that system, basically there was a strict regulation of all behavior, from men's hair, women's hair, color of hair, and it was really about instilling a certain kind of Christian values in the students. And so I think what happened in the 1980s and 1990s when these schools, which were then called multiracial schools, started opening up to black children, they basically added black hair as an afterthought. They would just add a sentence or two concerning the regulation of black hair. But what has basically been happening over the last couple of years is I think many black parents, as well as the kids themselves, have realized that this use of language to describe their hair in particular ways permits certain other kinds of conversations about blackness and black people outside the classroom and even, let's say, outside the school.
So what does black hair represent in this context, in your opinion?
Well, I think in this context, people think of it partly as different from other hair. And in some ways, that's where the problem starts, is that if you think that you can regulate black hair as separate from other people's hair, then the only thing you can end up doing is reproducing misconceptions. So, for example, the whole question of an afro. An afro is not really a hairstyle. The afro is how your hair grows out of the skull. So if you write even a sentence and you say no afros, you are literally saying that black kids shouldn't have hair growing out of their scalps. And it's not really a regulation that is fair, nor is it accurate, precisely because you are misrepresenting the afro. Because you are basically almost making it seem as if there's something called the euro. So if there's no hairstyle called the euro, there shouldn't really be a hairstyle called the afro. So those kinds of terminologies, even something as positive as an afro, ends up being a negative.
As you mentioned earlier when we were speaking, you were telling me that a lot of these schools, especially the more elite schools, the private schools, still have mostly white teachers, even though there are more and more students of color and specifically black students. Who should be leading this discussion, in your opinion? I mean, there really seems to be sort of like this backlash between the people, the students, their parents, and the rules and the top-down policies that they're trying to implement.
I think one of the things that has changed is also that in the 1980s and 1990s, Black parents were willing to accept the compromises that were expected of them. So they were willing to accept the fact that their children were being told that they shouldn't speak indigenous languages, that their children's hair had to be a certain way. And I think one of the things that's changed is that many Black parents are now realizing that they have more power than they assumed to determine the school's policy. Because again, in South Africa, we have what are called school governing bodies, where parents can contribute to the regulations and policies of a school. So that power is now being felt, and many Black parents, I think, are now trying to use it to change the institutional culture of the schools.
Thank you so much for joining us on France 24. Hlonipha Mokoena, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Thank you so much for speaking to us on this edition of Eye on Africa. That's it from us for now. Do stay tuned. There's more news coming up on France 24.